The security office of the Ashworth Hotel smelled like burnt coffee and synthetic carpet, and Ines had been sitting in it for 2 hours and 43 minutes. She knew the exact time because the clock on the wall was running 6 minutes behind. She'd caught the discrepancy against her wristwatch the moment they'd brought her in, and she had nothing else to do but count. Counting was what she did. It was the one thing in her life that had never failed her. Numbers didn't lie, people did. The 2 men from corporate sat across the narrow table from her. One was heavyset with a wedding ring. He kept turning on his finger, a nervous habit she'd catalogued in the first 10 minutes. The other was younger, officious, with a manila folder open in front of him that contained printouts she recognized immediately, her own audit reports, her own column structure, her handwriting on the sticky note in the top corner that read Q3 reconciliation complete. Mrs. Ballard, the young one again, you need to understand the seriousness of what we're looking at here. She understood exactly what she was looking at. $53,000, moved through the hotel's private event booking system over 4 months in increments calibrated to stay just under the automated threshold alert. Someone had used her credentials, her login, her employee access tier, her ID badge she kept on a lanyard by the front door of the apartment she shared with Jonah. Had shared. She was already processing that in past tense. I didn't do this, she said. Her voice was level. She'd learned steadiness young, across a series of foster placements where crying got you ignored and asking questions got you moved. You learned to be still. You learned to wait things out and trust math when nothing else held. The transaction pattern is wrong. Whoever moved this money used increments of $847 to avoid triggering the automated flag, but our internal threshold runs at $900, not $1,000. It was recalibrated 8 months ago because of a vendor dispute. I know because I submitted the recalibration memo myself. She looked at the folder. If I were laundering money through my own system, I would not be triggering my own alert. The heavyset man stopped turning his ring. The young one made a careful note. Neither of them said anything else, which told her everything. They'd already decided. This conversation was theater. A procedural formality before the police arrived. She could feel it the way you feel weather in your joints. The particular pressure shift in the room, the way the younger one kept glancing at the door. Jonah had been gone since 9:15. She'd gotten a text at 9:14. Something came up, home late. And then her car was no longer in the employee lot. And then his phone went straight to voicemail on the first ring, the way phones do when they've been deliberately powered off. The corporate team had arrived at 9:47. Her real phone was in her purse. Her purse was in the apartment. She had the hotel's landline sitting on the corner of the table, and one number still living in her memory, 5 years undisturbed, like a fire exit she'd never wanted to use. I need to make a call, she said. The heavy-set man pushed the phone across the table with 2 fingers, the way you'd push food toward an animal you weren't certain about. Make it quick. She angled her body away from them and stared at the keypad. Victor Carrow had written the number himself in clean block numerals on the back of a plain white card and slid it across a conference table at his downtown offices, while she sat opposite him, 24 years old and dry-mouthed, and not showing a single tremor, having just informed him that she'd found his money moving through the accounts she managed at a property on 5th. He'd studied her for a long moment before he spoke. You could have gone to the police. I could have, she'd said. The records would have done the rest. You'd have been tied to 3 properties by Tuesday. And yet, here you are. Here I am. She'd made herself hold his eyes, which were the specific dark of someone who hadn't slept properly in years. Because I want something. He'd listened, given her what she asked. A clean reference, a transfer to a different hotel across the city, the student loan debt she'd carried since aging out of foster care, at 18 cleared through a company she wasn't supposed to be able to trace but did, in 40 minutes, on her lunch break. In exchange, she'd restructured 3 months of ledgers, closed the gap cleanly, and walked away. They never spoke again. He'd pressed the card into her hand as she stood to leave. He'd said, quietly, without ceremony, "When someone you trust decides you're more useful as a scapegoat than a person, call me." She'd thought it was a strange thing to say to someone. She kept the number anyway. She dialed. 1 ring. 2, the corporate men were murmuring behind her. On the 3rd ring, the line clicked open. Silence. "This is Ines Ballard," she said, keeping her voice below the ambient noise of the room. "You gave me your number 5 years ago. I'm at the Ashworth Hotel on Meridian, security office on the 2nd floor. Someone used my credentials to move $50,000, and the person responsible left the city 90 minutes ago. The police are on their way." She stopped, breathed. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm calling in the arrangement." A pause. 4 seconds. "Don't sign anything." His voice was exactly as she remembered, low, unhurried, carrying the particular weight of a man who had never once needed to raise it to get results. "Don't answer any more questions. If a police officer enters that room before I arrive, give them one name. Whitmore. Say nothing else." When? 12 minutes. The line went dead. She set the receiver down. She turned back to the table and folded her hands in her lap and looked at the clock that was 6 minutes slow. She counted. Carrow arrived in 11 minutes and 40 seconds. She heard him before the door opened, the particular change in the hallway, voices dropping mid-sentence, a quick shuffle of someone stepping aside. The single word, "sir," spoken in the register of a person who has just recognized they're standing in exactly the wrong place. He came through the door and the room reorganized itself around him. Not because he was loud or theatrical about it. He was neither. He was simply the kind of man whose stillness had a specific gravity, and every other person in the room instinctively recalibrated toward it. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, sleeves rolled to the forearm despite the hour. There was more grey at his temples than 5 years ago, and a pale scar along his jaw that hadn't been there before. Thin, precise, the kind that comes from something deliberate. He looked at the corporate men the way you look at a discrepancy you've already decided how to handle. "Gentlemen," he said pleasantly, "you've made a significant procedural error tonight, and I'd encourage you to consider how you'd like to address it before my attorney drafts the paperwork in the morning." The heavyset one started to say something. Carrow looked at him, just looked. The man stopped. "Miss Ballard is leaving with me," he continued, same tone, same finality. "Any genuine inquiry gets routed through Whitmore's office. You do not have her signed statement. You do not have her ID. Whatever you believe you have in that folder came from a system she managed and can be read a dozen ways that would be profoundly inconvenient for your parent company's insurance exposure." He adjusted his cuff. "Do we understand each other?" No one spoke. He looked at Ines then, a brief, clinical look, checking for visible damage, cataloguing it, moving on. His eyes paused for a moment on her hands, which she realized were pressed white-knuckled against the table. She pulled them into her lap. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes." "Then we're going." She stood. She followed him out the door and past 2 men in dark suits, who were standing in the hallway with the studied neutrality of people paid to resemble furniture. The hotel's head of security was flattened against the far wall, with the expression of a man who has just discovered the floor is less solid than he'd assumed. Carrow walked at a pace that expected her to keep up. She did. They went through a service corridor she didn't recognize and out a side exit that opened directly to the curb, where a black SUV was idling. The rear door opened before they reached it. She got in. He followed. The door shut, and the city noise dropped away like something cut with a blade. The interior was warm, leather and something faintly herbal. She looked straight ahead. "You're hyperventilating," he said. He was reading something on his phone. "I'm not." "You're not far from it. Your breathing has been wrong since we left the building." He put the phone face down on his knee. "You spent 3 hours holding it together in that room. You can stop now." She didn't answer. She looked at the window. She counted the blocks. On the 7th, the shakiness she'd been bracing against for 3 hours washed through her all at once. Her hands trembled, her chest went tight, her vision blurred slightly at the edges. She pressed her hands between her knees and breathed through it like a long column of numbers she was forcing to balance. Carrow didn't speak. He didn't reach for her. He simply waited in the particular way of someone who has sat beside worse things than this and understands that contact isn't always comfort. By the time the SUV pulled into an underground garage, she was steady, cold and exhausted and running on fumes, but steady. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building downtown that had no exterior signage and a lobby staffed by men who looked like they had done things that didn't appear on any resume. The elevator required a key Carrow didn't have to dig for. He pressed it to the panel with the ease of a man doing something he'd done 10,000 times. The apartment itself surprised her. She'd expected something that looked like a statement. This looked like a place where someone actually lived, books on shelves that had been read, a half-empty glass of water on a desk that someone had walked away from and hadn't gone back to, a door to a study standing open with papers visible inside. A woman met them at the elevator landing, middle-aged, efficient, the economy of movement of someone who had seen worse than this before her second cup of coffee. "Dr. Paulson's in the West Room," she said to Carrow, "and nothing else." "You don't have to see him," Carrow said to Ines. "I'm fine." "You're functional. Those aren't the same thing." He met her eyes. "Your call." She let the doctor check her over. He took her pulse and blood pressure, asked 3 questions, and didn't make a production of any of it. He left her with a water bottle and instructions to eat something in the next 2 hours. Then she was alone in a room that had been quietly prepared. Blanket folded on the end of a low couch, a plate of food on the side table she hadn't requested. She sat because her legs made the decision before her brain did. Carrow came back 20 minutes later. He'd taken off his jacket. He held himself the way he'd looked when he first walked into that security office, contained, deliberate, every inch of him the product of years of not letting anything surface that he didn't intend. He set a folder on the table between them and sat in the chair across from her. "Do you want to know now?" he said. "Or do you need time?" She looked at the folder. "Tell me." He opened it and turned the first page toward her. A photograph. Jonah. Same jaw, same slightly too relaxed smile she'd read for 2 years as easygoing and now understood, looking at it in this room at this hour, was the practiced smile of someone maintaining a performance. "His name isn't Jonah Cates," Carrow said. "His real name is Reed Casserly. He works for a man named Elias Dawn, who controls distribution operations out of the Eastern Docks. Dawn and I have had a territorial dispute running for approximately 3 years. He turned another page. "Casserly was placed near you 18 months ago. You were identified as an asset because you managed financial records adjacent to one of my operations, your access tier, your audit methodology, and because someone who built herself from nothing without anyone's help tends to know how to stay quiet." She stared at the photograph. "The betting ring he ran through the hotel system was a cover operation," Carrow continued. "The actual objective was the quarterly audit logs you generated. His phone account logs, approximately 400 photographs taken in your apartment over 14 months. 400 photographs. In the apartment she'd furnished piece by piece over 2 years. On the desk where she worked evenings, the one she'd bought second-hand and repainted herself, because she wanted something that felt like it was actually hers. She remembered a Thursday 3 months ago, coming home early, finding him at that desk. He'd said he was using her printer because his laptop battery was dead. She'd believed him. She'd apologized for interrupting. "Where is he now?" she asked. Carrow was quiet for 2 seconds. "In custody, not the kind that files paperwork." And the photographs. Recovered and destroyed. She sat with that. She looked at the folder, then at his face, which was giving her nothing except a careful, watchful patience. "You already knew something was wrong," she said, "before I called." A brief pause. I'd had a system alert for 3 weeks that someone was probing records adjacent to my operation through a secondary access account. I hadn't finished tracing it. But you kept that number active for 5 years. He didn't answer immediately. And you answered on the 3rd ring, she said, at 11:47 on a Wednesday. I answered, he said, because it was you. She let that sit in the room. She'd spent 2 years building something she'd believed was ordinary and safe. The shared grocery lists, the alarm clock set 10 minutes early so he could shower first, the particular Tuesday night routine of dinner at the same place on the corner. She'd believed in it the way you believe in a set of numbers before the audit reveals the gap. You trust the surface until the surface breaks. He spent 2 years pretending, she said, not quite to Carrow, more to the room. 2 years maintaining the performance. Safe job, reasonable hours, didn't ask too many questions. She looked up. I wanted someone who didn't want anything from me I hadn't offered. I thought that's what he was. People sell ordinary like it's a product, Carrow said quietly. They find someone who wants it badly enough, and they give them the packaging. The inside is whatever it has to be. There was something in his voice. Not pity, nothing soft about it. Recognition. He knew the specific shape of what she was describing, the way you know something you've thought about many times, from many angles. I can't go back to the hotel, she said. No. The apartment is in his name. His fake name, apparently, which creates its own complications. I'm aware. My credentials are flagged in a fraud investigation. Even if I'm cleared, it follows me through every background check for. She calculated it automatically, 3 to 4 years, minimum. Yes. She pressed her palms flat on her knees. The trembling was gone, replaced by something colder and more useful. The specific anger of someone who'd built something by hand and watched another person dismantle it deliberately and carefully over 14 months. What do you want from me? She asked, direct. She put it on the table without decoration, because she'd learned at 8 years old that nothing in life was actually free, and the sooner you named the transaction, the sooner you knew what you were actually in. Carrow didn't flinch. If anything, something in his posture adjusted. A slight easing, the subtle shift of a man who'd been waiting for the conversation to become honest. My operation moves significant financial volume across legitimate fronts: property development, shipping logistics, private hospitality. The person who's managed my accounts for 12 years is retiring at quarter's end. He reached into the folder and produced a single sheet, turning it to face her. Compensation figure, access structure, oversight parameters. The role exists. The qualifications match what you do better than most people in this city who do it legally. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the oversight framework, which was detailed enough to tell her that whoever had designed it understood exactly what imprecision cost. You're offering me a job, she said. I'm offering you a position with security clearance, a residence in the building's secured annex, and a professional record clean enough that the last 3 years of the Ashworth Hotel become unreachable by anyone who goes looking. He held her gaze. I'm not offering charity, Ms. Ballard. I'm offering you a role where the particular way your mind works is an actual asset instead of something someone else exploits. She picked up the sheet. She read it twice. She identified 3 things she'd want specified in writing before she signed anything. I have conditions, she said. He waited. I review everything I touch. I don't move money I can't account for, and I don't sign off on anything I haven't fully understood. If you want someone to approve numbers without reading them, I'm the wrong person for this. I know that. It's part of why you're sitting here. And I'm not a prisoner. If at any point I determine this arrangement isn't working, I leave, with enough to start over. That's non-negotiable. He studied her across the table. His eyes were doing the same thing they'd done 5 years ago in that conference room, running a calculation, checking it again. Agreed, he said, on the condition that you give the arrangement 6 months before invoking the exit. I don't rebuild a financial operation overnight. 6 months, she said. She set the sheet down. She looked at him, at the scar along his jaw, at the grey threading through his hair, at the specific exhaustion in his face that wasn't weakness, but something closer to the accumulated weight of being the last line of everything, year after year, without anyone to hand it to. She'd seen that look. She'd worn it in different forms. It recognized itself across a table. "Why did you keep the number active?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you were the only person in 5 years who sat across from me knowing exactly what I was and asked for something proportionate. Not too much. Not nothing. What you'd earned and then you walked." He looked at her steadily. "I kept it because someone who does that once tends to be worth knowing when the world eventually proves them right about how unsafe it actually is." He stood. He straightened his shirt cuffs with the automatic precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. "Carrow," she said it before she'd decided to. He stopped. "The man who sent Jonah." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. He turned back, fully this time. He looked at her across the room in the lamplight, and beneath the wall of controlled stillness she could see the thing that lived behind it. Not warmth, not sentimentality, something harder and more permanent. A structure that had decided what it was defending, and had not reconsidered that decision in a long time. "Then he'll learn," Carrow said quietly, "what happens when someone reaches for something that belongs to me." He walked out. The door closed behind him, not a slam, a precise and deliberate click that carried more weight than any slam could have. Ines sat in the silence. 42 floors below, the city moved without knowing her name. She'd spent 2 years inside a story that had been written for her by someone else, a story about a woman who wanted ordinary things and had found them, and the whole time the pages had been photographed and forwarded and used. She'd been a tool that believed it was a person living a life. She picked up the single-page document. Read it a third time. The numbers were clean. The structure was honest, as far as honest went in a framework like this. She'd already identified what she'd need in the addendum. From the hallway, Carrow's voice, clipped, absorbing something, the register of a man processing information that required immediate action. She stood up. She straightened her jacket. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the hall. Carrow was standing with his phone to his ear, jaw tight. He looked at her. She looked back. "Tell me what you need," she said. He ended the call. "Dawn knows you're here," he said. "He's moving his Eastern operation tonight." She held his gaze. "How many accounts does he have liquid right now?" A pause. "Why?" "Because if I know where his money is sitting, I can show you where he can't afford a war." She didn't break eye contact. "Numbers don't lie, Carrow. Let me show you what his look like." He looked at her for one long, still beat, 15 years of running the South Waterfront, of never once having to explain himself to anyone, of a phone he'd kept active longer than was rational, and something in his face settled. Not softness. Resolution. The look of a calculation that has just returned exactly the answer it expected. "Studies through there," he said, "laptop on the left." She walked past him down the hall. She heard his footsteps behind her, measured and steady, matching her pace. She didn't look back, but she understood, with the same bone-level certainty that had always lived in columns and patterns and the truth that surfaces when everything else is noise, that she was not walking into a cage. She was walking into the only room where the way her mind worked had ever been the point. The screen glowed in the study's half-dark. She sat down. She started reading.